So my first pregnancy ended up being ectopic. Ectopic pregnancy essentially is when a fertilized egg implants and grows outside of your uterus. And for me, it was growing inside of my fallopian tube. With this pregnancy, I knew that I was pregnant before I'd taken a test. I just knew the pregnancy hormones were high. I knew straight away. It wasn't long after I had the positive pregnancy test that I started to have bleeding, and the bleeding wasn't a lot. It was very, quite light, brownish in colour, but it was consistent. So it never really went away. I would have it for a few days, and it might not have it for a day or a couple of days, and then it would come back. I just knew something wasn't right. I just knew. I think sometimes women's instinct can be so right at times. And I just remember being addicted to Googling and researching. It was unhealthy. I would wake up and I would Google just any spare opportunity that I had. I would just be Googling, researching. I think I was trying to use it as a form of control at a time when I felt like I didn't have any control over what was going on with my body. But I remember just sort of, when I was researching, finding out that, it could mean implantation bleeding. Bleeding can happen in pregnancy as long as it's sort of not heavy. But I did push with my hospital to see if I could have a scan, conveyed my sort of nervousness around this bleeding. And I was hearing a really similar story of it's common in pregnancy. It can sort of happen as long as it's sort of not heavy, and things. So I wasn't able to get a scan. And I remember them also asking me, are you having shoulder tip pain? And I kept getting asked this, and not once did I have any bit of shoulder pain. That just never happened for me. And it was something that I just kept getting asked. And I really did feel like the medical professions only felt like it could be an ectopic if you're having shoulder pain, which I never had. I then, soon after, had my midwife appointment, and I remember feeling, oh, this will be good. I can sort of speak to someone about my nervousness and anxiousness of what's happening. And then I went in and conveyed, I'm bleeding, I'm really scared, something doesn't feel right. And then I remember in the midwife appointment, this kind of just sort of not really sort of looked into, or not really, just sort of brushed away sort of thing. And just sort of, I was told, oh, okay, this happens, it's common in the early stages, as long as it's sort of not heavy bleeding. And I remember also in that same appointment, I got asked, are you speaking to it? And I remember just thinking, okay, am I crazy, or have I just completely overreacted here? Because I'm now being told, am I speaking to it? Looking back, that was really irresponsible advice to give to me, because at that stage, it was so early on. Speaking to it should not have been kind of mentioned. But I remember just thinking, okay, maybe I'm overthinking, maybe I'm overreacting kind of here. Maybe the pregnancy hormones have got me just more anxious, so maybe something isn't wrong. I remember in the midwife appointment, I did have my bloods taken at that appointment, and when I had my bloods taken, I fainted. I was also sick. I do have a needle phobia, and I have had some quite strong reactions to needles previously. So I did kind of wonder whether that was just part of my sort of needle phobia, but looking back, I think that could have been a sign of something. I still couldn't shake off the fact that something was wrong, because even after my midwife appointment, I was still having bleeding. I remember speaking to the hospital, asking if I could have a scan, and again, still was getting nowhere. So I got booked in for a private scan to a clinic where essentially I wasn't really given much information on what the results sort of meant. So I had the scan at around 6 weeks, and what the results conveyed was it was a pregnancy of unknown location. So now I know more. At that stage, there should have been something there, or something growing at 6 weeks. I now know that with my with it being my first pregnancy, I was a bit naive and just thought, okay, maybe it's something, maybe it's too small. So I came out of that sort of feeling like I haven't got answers, but I now know that a pregnancy of an unknown location could and is a kind of sign of an ectopic, which I wasn't really aware of at that sort of at that point. And then I think I was about sort of 9 weeks in, and I went back to my hometown for my mum's 70th birthday. So I was about a 3-hour drive away from my sort of normal hospital where I'd been seen at. And the night before sort of my mum's celebration, we had a takeaway, and I just remember feeling so thirsty. Like I drank a lot, but I just felt like I could just keep drinking and drinking so much water. And then I remember just feeling so uncomfortably full, like I could burst. And I remember being like, okay, maybe I've eaten too much, but I do remember just feeling so bloated and so full. But I went to bed, and I think it was probably about 4:30 in the morning, 5 o'clock. I just woke up with excruciating kind of cramps and shooting pains. It was just crippling. It felt like period pains, but just horrendous period pains. And I remember having painkillers and then just trying to sort of sleep it off. And I remember just like lying there, just not being able to sleep, just being in a lot of pain. And then I don't know when it was, I maybe was able to doze off or slightly, and then I just woke up again, just in excruciating agony, shooting pains again, horrendous kind of cramps, and then I just knew something wasn't right. So tried to call an ambulance. I struggled to get one. So I think they wanted me to kind of come in and be driven into hospital. And I remember trying to stand up, and I just fainted. I collapsed. I couldn't stand. So at this point, they said that they would provide an ambulance, but I didn't get one for, I think it was over an hour or something. I don't know how long it was. And I just remember in that time just being in excruciating sort of pain. And when the paramedics arrived, their first instinct wasn't ectopic. I remember them sort of suggesting it could be kidney stones. And again, I got asked about the shoulder pain. And as I said, I've had no shoulder pain throughout the pregnancy at all. And then I was put into an ambulance to go to hospital. I remember we went over a speed bump, and I was sort of being sick when that sort of happened. And then when we got to hospital, it was so frantic. I remember sort of having a morning of just not really being seen, waiting around for ages, and then to go to hospital and there was so many nurses surrounding me, and just loads of questions getting fired at me. It was really sort of overwhelming. And then I remember them taking my bloods, and then I fainted when they took my bloods, and I was sick. I was fitting on the floor. I remember they wanted me to do a pregnancy test and I couldn't. I remember being so nervous going to the toilet, being like, I think I'm going to faint in here, and I'm on my own. And then that's when they did an internal scan on me, and that's when I got told, you're having an ectopic pregnancy, it's burst your fallopian tube, you've got internal bleeding. And I remember just feeling like it was like a bullet to the heart to like find out that your pregnancy's failed, that you now only have one fallopian tube. And I remember just thinking, can I get pregnant again? Has this ruined my chances for the future? And then just being told, right, we need to operate on you now, and just having all these forms thrown in my face with about a million things, million questions, and just sort of things of saying about the risks of the operation, the risks of death. What do I want done with the pregnancy? Do I want a cremation? Do I want burial? And it was just a lot to take in. And I just felt like I was having an out-of-body experience. It was so strange. It felt so surreal. It was like I wasn't there. It was like I was watching myself go through it. And I don't know if that was my way of kind of being able to cope or deal with it. But I just remember my husband being in absolute bits. And I wasn't crying, which was really strange. But I think because I knew I had to go in for an operation, I was like, right, if you're going in for an operation, you've got to try and be strong and got to have like hopefully like a bit of a positive mindset going into this. But I also just think I was just having a bit of an out-of-body experience where I just could not compute what was going on. So I had the operation. I stayed in overnight. I was in quite a bit of pain sort of after the operation, and they gave me sort of painkillers and more medication and painkillers to take home with me. What I would say is the recovery physically was a lot quicker than I expected, because when I came out of the operation, my stomach was completely bruised. I was just black and blue all over. Struggled to bend down, was painful to sort of walk and move my body, but I did recover quickly. The bruising did go down quicker than I sort of thought. And I had 2 weeks off work in total, which now looking back on was just not long enough, because I had to go back, I think was it 5 days later, back to the hospital and do blood tests to make sure that my pregnancy hormones were going down. And I remember going back to the hospital and being really anxious and really nervous because I was going back to somewhere where such a traumatic sort of incident happened. And I remember that sort of eating into my recovery time, being really nervous about going back again. And just 2 weeks is not long enough, because I think in that time I was so focused on the physical recovery of, I want to get better, I want to be able to sort of, be able to move. I was like tracking, my bruising kind of going down and things like that. The emotional side for me took a while to sink in. I obviously was upset about it at the start, but I think it took a good month or 2 months later where it really sunk in, like what had happened, what I had been through, what could have happened to me, if the operation didn't go well and things like that. So I just don't think 2 weeks was long enough, and I wish that I took more time, and I went straight back into work. I was in a really busy period as well, and I didn't give myself time to fully recover and fully get my head around what had happened and come to terms sort of with that. So my biggest advice for anyone is take the time, take more time off than you think that you would need. And I know that's not feasible for, for everybody to do that. But if you can do, because you will need it. And also just be gentle to yourself afterwards, because it took, and I'm still, this happened to me years ago, a few years now, and I still don't think I fully recovered sort of from it. So I think it's giving yourself that space and time to fully acknowledge what has happened to you, and to just be gentle with yourself afterwards as well, because you won't realize how much it's kind of impacted you. I also kind of learned from this experience that if you feel like something isn't right, and if you know that something isn't right, really push to get seen. I wish I pushed more, if I'm honest. You really have to advocate for yourself in these situations, and it's hard to do when you feel vulnerable, when you're anxious as well. But that's one thing that I've really, really learned. If you feel like something isn't right, you know your body better than anybody else. So really try and push to get seen. I would also say that shoulder pain with ectopic, just don't listen to that, because that just didn't happen for me, and I felt like that was the telltale sign of it being an ectopic pregnancy, and I never had that throughout it. So I really, really wouldn't sort of listen to that. And what I've learned is also not having a midwife appointment so soon. For me, it was quite triggering sort of afterwards. They didn't cancel my future midwife appointment. So after I sort of had the loss, I was still getting notified that I had upcoming midwife appointments, which just really threw me when I was feeling like I was starting to recover sort of slightly. And I've just kind of learned is waiting till you've had a positive scan, or a more positive scan, until you have your midwife appointment, because it can just be a bit emotional to have to go through that at such an early stage if it's not successful. But I definitely think the biggest thing is looking after yourself kind of after something like this happens. It takes a long time to process, to recover. Some people say time is a healer, but I think with pregnancy loss, the longer it goes on, sometimes the harder it can be, because you have little milestones. You maybe know the due dates and things like that come up. Or you could be like, I could be at the 6 months mark now. I could be at, so I just think you have to be so kind to yourself in this process, knowing that you have to consistently keep looking after yourself after something as big as this sort of happens to you.